I'm Neil Morgenbesser. On behalf of the Harvard Club of Southern California, I want to thank you for joining us uh, at this Harvard Speak virtual event. The Harvard Club of Southern California is one of the largest and most active Harvard alumni clubs in the world, and we're delighted to be able to sponsor this event. My name is Neil Morgenbesser. I'm Harvard College class of '86 and director of the Harvard Speak LA program, which brings the opportunity to the broader alumni community for some intellectually and academically stimulating interactions with some of the most stellar Harvard faculty members. Our recent talks included Dr. Loretta Mickley, head of Harvard's Atmospheric Chemistry Modeling Group on wildfires, astronomy professor Avi Loeb on the evidence of extraterrestrial intelligence, and law school professor Randall Kennedy on his upcoming book on the demise of Jim Crow. Future events include Ned Hall, philosophy professor and former chairman of the department, on May 15th, English professor Stephen Greenblatt, psychology professor Steven Pinker, Kennedy School professor Tariq Massoud, and former dean of the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences and sociology professor Theda Scotchpole. So stay tuned for those over the next few months, as well as some more we have in the works. Today, we're extremely excited to be able to hear from Professor Harvey C. Mansfield. Professor Mansfield is the Kinnan Research Professor of Government at Harvard University. One of the longest serving professors in Harvard's history, Professor Mansfield entered Harvard College as an undergraduate in 1949, following which he received a Fulbright scholarship to study in England and completed his military service, returning to Harvard and receiving his PhD in 1961. In 1962, after a short stint out here as a lecturer at UC Berkeley, Professor Mansfield returned to Harvard in 1962, as I said, this time permanently, teaching for over 60 years until his retirement in 2023. While at Harvard, Professor Mansfield was known, one might say notorious, for being an outspoken conservative voice on the Harvard faculty, taking positions on everything from affirmative action to grade inflation. Indeed, his position on the latter topic earned him the well-known moniker Harvey C. Mansfield. In the last few months, the Harvard Crimson has surprisingly published 3 opinion pieces by Professor Mansfield. They are entitled, 1, to Harvard students who have never met a conservative, 2, can a woke Harvard still be the ivory tower? And 3, conservative faculty need affirmative action. Professor Mansfield began the first column by stating, quote, I am a conservative Republican plucked out of retirement where I belong to help Crimson readers discover how much diversity they can stomach, unquote. Now it is our turn. It is my pleasure to welcome Professor Mansfield and open this conversation with him. When I asked him how he wanted to proceed, he suggested he would be interested in doing Q&A with the group. So I've got a list of questions. I've asked people to submit some questions, and then we're going to invite people to submit questions on the chat, and I will read them as we can. So let me start by asking Professor Mansfield, what led to these columns in the Crimson?
Well, thanks very much for having me. And it's a pleasure to address fellow alumni. So I really don't know what went through their minds, but it's indicative of a change at Harvard, a reaction to events, beginning especially with the Supreme Court decision on admissions against affirmative action. And since then, and with other events, especially the downfall of Claudine Gay as our president after 6 months, then the atmosphere has changed and become a little more queer, sort of asking and wondering and not so confident. So this is a real surprise that the editors of the Crimson invited me, just a professor, let alone a conservative professor, to write a series of 6 articles, 3 of which are already published. You can find them just by going to the Crimson website, if you like, and which I've done. In fact, I just finished off the 4th this afternoon. So I just think it's a general change in the atmosphere, a little bit less confident, and and especially not so um, wrapped up in that one word diversity, which has characterized Harvard for the last couple of decades.
So let me ask, your columns are focused on the conservative liberal divide. How important is it that a university has differences of opinion, and what have you seen at Harvard, and what do you see as the importance of the issue and the prospects for change?
Yeah, it needs to be a little sharper than differences of opinion, because in every university, or even the Communist Party, would have differences of opinion. But I'm especially interested in the difference of opinion between our two major parties. That's what I think is lacking at Harvard. So in this article, I speak a little of what I consider the general characteristic of Democrats and Republicans, and try to explain what it is when you just what is missing when you just have Democrats and the Republicans. And and if I can say this quickly, I would say that our two parties are in an argument. Parties are about partisan differences, and partisan differences express themselves in argument. Parties address each other. It's not simply that each has an opinion, or even that those two opinions conflict. It's that in conflicting, they address one another. If you're especially interested in politics, you wake up in the morning, you see what the other side has been saying, and you think to yourself, how can I oppose this? What's wrong about it? So you think of yourself in an argument. And what the Democrats especially want is the word they use, inclusiveness. They think that our country is a whole, a common uh, community, and they want to make sure that every person is included in that community. Now, that means that they're especially interested in people who might not be included, who are vulnerable or marginalized. Those are words which they use. So they focus on the edges of the community, and that's what they're especially worried about. And they think that in order to have a whole community, everybody must be treated equally. So that it's hard to know which do they prefer, being a whole or being equal. But in order to be a whole, you all have to be equal, and you can't all be equal unless you belong to a whole of equals. So they especially think in terms of compassion and empathy. What is it like to be vulnerable? And how can those people be treated and raised to a level of equality so that they feel they are included? And Republicans, they look at this and they have an objection. It's good to have a community, but every community has differences, and those differences amount to inequalities. You can't have difference without an inequality of some sort. You have more or you have less of some quality that other people have. And they think that those among us who contribute more, either by being wealthy or being more intelligent or better looking celebrities, these people deserve to have their differences honored and respected and not treated like everybody else. So they have a kind of oligarchical view, that is, the government of the few. But since this is a democracy and we live in a democratic era, they try to think of what distinguishes people without creating, without there being just a few of them. So one thing that distinguishes a lot of people from a few is that most people earn their living. So people who earn their living ought to be preferred or honored, or one should just think of them as better than those who don't or who live off the government. Um, and so remember Mitt Romney in 2012 when he ran for the president was caught making a private remark in which he spoke of there are givers and there are takers, and the takers amount to 47% of all Americans. So this was found out and reported, and the Democrats jumped on him for that. So Republicans are always susceptible to being jumped on for being oligarchical, but they think that the wholeness of a community requires that those who contribute more be better rewarded. So that if you make a lot of money, say, that's impressive. It also means you pay a lot of taxes. So those are the two parties, one for equality and the other for inequality. Whereas the Democrats think in terms of empathy. And how can I feel sorry for people? You could say that a liberal is a person who spends his life looking for people to be sorry for. The conservatives admire. When you admire, you look up to someone who's better than you are, or something that's better than you are, some person, or some principle, or maybe God. God is above us, higher than us. Whereas when you're compassionate, you put yourself on the level of the person that you feel sorry for. And you say to yourself, what would I think if I were like that? So that's the kind of most general expression, I would say, of the difference between our two parties. And it doesn't always appear in policy differences or or temporary things, because every human being both admires and has compassion. It's a question of which of the two prevails. That's important. So now, if you just have Democrats in our, as is the case at Harvard, especially in the faculty, and even more especially in the administration, then you're lacking in that other side of the argument. And you could think of our system, our political system as a whole, as between these going on, but this is the normal thing, that between these two parties, and they're pretty closely divided. So you can expect that you're going to have to live under the other side's presidency now and again. It's like Yale and Harvard. Saying Harvard never wants to lose to Yale, but if Harvard won every single time, it wouldn't be a rivalry. What we've got in our parties is a rivalry. That the most general statement of that. And the rivalry is especially need to listen to the other side. So it isn't just a matter of having an open mind. That's perhaps too general. It's having a mind that is open to the other side from the one you hold.
So let me ask, can these are two different worldviews? Obviously, as you say, they can coexist in a person, they clearly coexist in society. They're having problems coexisting in higher education at Harvard.
Yeah.
Can they coexist? What needs to change for that to happen? What went wrong, if it's wrong, and what needs to change to make that viable?
The main thing that needs to change is the hiring of professors. And that is the most difficult thing and the most long-term thing that needs to be changed. We have at Harvard now more professors who are sympathetic to Palestinians than conservatives. that I think is a situation that needs to be addressed. And so, Steven Pinker, the psychology professor you mentioned, he's one of the founders of a group I belong to called the Council for Academic Freedom at Harvard. And he has 5 principles. And one of them is this phrase, viewpoint diversity, which again is too general. I say, instead of viewpoint diversity, I would say liberals and conservatives. And I think of his 5 principles, that's the most important. You're getting more conservatives among students right now, but not many more. It's the invitation I got from the Crimson, that comes mostly, I think, out of a change of view in the liberals, rather than their being converted to conservatism and thinking that everything they've thought up to now is wrong. No, that isn't happening. So, but the main thing we need is more conservatives. When I retired 2 years ago, I was one of a real handful. I mean, one handful of conservatives. This doesn't refer so much to how people vote. There may be, but what people say publicly. So, and that's the reason why I've been or become fairly notorious. So I began with the idea that I'm a professor, that's what I like, and I like teaching. And I'm not going to speak up and take a stand on issues unless there's nobody else who will do so. And that turned out to be no limit whatsoever on my loquacity, because it was rare. So I had, by the way, another one of my most prized honors, that I'm the only professor who has ever been honored by being mocked by the Harvard band at the halftime of football. That happened to me twice. Once for feminism and another for grade inflation. Those are a couple of my issues. Yeah.
So you talk in one of your articles about the difference between opponents and enemies.
Yeah.
And one of the questions just came in on the chat is, we've lost the ability to have a dialogue. So
Yeah.
what has happened here?
Yeah.
Is it education? Is it lack of family? Is it cell phones? What's gone wrong? And is there intrinsically a sense that we're moral enemies and we shouldn't be talking to each other? Is that predominantly on the left? How do you view all that?
Right. I think there is a distinction between opponents and enemies. And opponents can have dialogue. And I try to be more specific about the dialogue that takes place between liberals and conservatives. Whereas opponents are outside, what you might say, the regime of free speech. So the Palestinians who are supporting Hamas, who are rapists and murderers, and who suppress their own people, are using their free speech to favor and even to put us in a situation where free speech would come to an end, or to support that. They use free speech to oppose free speech. So I think those people are in a different category from opponents who are not going to shut you up and who actually would rather like to hear you and even to argue with you. And so that's the distinction I make between the two two groups that utilize the constitutional right of free speech. Those who use it to maintain it, and those who use it to put an end to it.
Yeah. So your solution, I know you referred to it just now, is affirmative action for conservatives, professors. But you know, other, talk about that. Why
Yeah,
is that the solution? You know, you have some concept that we need to be bipartisan before we can be nonpartisan.
yes,
So elaborate on that a little bit, and why
yeah,
is it feasible that having conservatives on the faculty will make that kind of difference, and why?
right. Well, you don't need 50-50 liberals and conservative professors. In fact, you need many fewer than that, many fewer. And indeed, if you begin to um, start a trend towards appointing conservative professors, then I think that would change the whole situation and the atmosphere at Harvard. Uh, to the point, because you would say to yourself, now Harvard is beginning to change its way, and I can respect that, and I'm not going to say complain if there's still 3/4 liberals and 1/4 conservatives. So to get to that situation, there does seem to we do seem to need, I think, some kind of affirmative action. And just to say this is somewhat aggressive on my part, because people will immediately say, "Well, you spent your career opposing affirmative action, and now when it comes close, and you've got the opportunity, you want it for yourself." So doesn't everybody just want more people like themselves? And uh, and what you want is nothing particularly respectable. So my answer to that is that I've been opposed to affirmative action on the basis of race and sex, which I don't think are um, should be relevant issues in appointments, especially with our history uh, concerning race. This is not a, a, a foolish thing that we can afford to experiment with. But we do need more conservatives. And that's not simply because they're different, but because they are different in a way that we need, because our thinking is inadequate if it is only about progress toward further equality. So the other side needs to be heard, it needs to be listened to. And this this came about, I think, um, through the late 60s rebellion, and which was never defeated, but rather quieted. And the rebels, or the New Left, as it was called at the time, grew up, went to graduate school, and became professors. And to quote the title of a book, they became tenured radicals. And then um, and the atmosphere of opinion at Harvard shifted considerably to the left. And this has been accentuated in recent years. When I don't think a single conservative has been appointed to the Harvard faculty in the last 10 years. Any any portion of it, even even the sciences, where you wouldn't think it would matter or be known. So it's gotten much worse. And the reason this happens is not only this political change, but also the prestige of science. Science seems to make a distinction between facts, which are scientific, and values, which are non-scientific and emotional. So when you appoint somebody, you appoint that person for his merit in regard to science and disregard his opinions. This distinction between fact and value is no longer very lively in philosophy departments. And it's one to me that doesn't make much sense. But it does have the consequence that people don't consider viewpoint when they're thinking of hiring professors. They think it's wrong even to consider viewpoint. They boast of not knowing whether the faculty has X number of conservative or has too many or too few. This is the kind of argument I've encountered when I've raised this point. I had a dean say to me, I don't know the politics of anyone on the faculty. And that, which didn't mean, of course, that he had no impression as to the overwhelming majority of opinion on the faculty. So, but it was wrong of me, it was partisan of me to raise the question. So that's why I say it's somewhat aggressive for me now to call for affirmative action for conservatives. It isn't the case that your politics or your partisanship means nothing to your work, to your profession. Even in the sciences, we now see how powerful the notion of diversity has become. But
So
yeah,
is the natural extension of that that a conservative student at Harvard is getting a much better education because they're being exposed to the other side and being forced to deal with it, whereas a liberal comes in and really doesn't even understand
yeah.
what the other position is? And if that's the case, how does that work at the faculty level? If they're only hearing from one side of the equation too.
That's a point I like to make myself. So, and you said it very well. I do think that the conservative students, few as they are, by the way, there are many more conservative students than there are conservative faculty. If they're, even though still very few, um, but they don't just swallow what they get. And then, in fact, they enter the classroom with the notion that, all right, let's see what I can learn from this person. So I'm not going to take as God's word everything that is said. So yeah, so I think what you said is correct, and the same thing too with the majority of liberal professors. They don't even know what conservatives say, and they don't use much energy to find out either. So it's there. My tenure at Harvard has been quite congenial. They Nobody dislikes me, or at least nobody insults me. They are full of courtesy. They hear me out, but they're not really listening, and they've got their minds made up beforehand. So on the other hand, I've had a good life and enjoyed teaching at Harvard. The students are wonderful. So I don't want to sound as if I'm 100% complaining. But come back to this distinction between nonpartisan and bipartisan. The trouble with most liberals is that they think liberalism is nonpartisan by itself, that we are the people that are above prejudice. And to be nonpartisan is to be without prejudice. And we don't really feel sorry for conservatives because conservatives don't even ask us to be sorry for them. They're pretty comfortable as they are, and they can read the Wall Street Journal. They have their own sources of information. And so we don't feel sorry for them. And feeling sorry is the main way that liberals feel morality. So they think that they are nonpartisan already. But if you ask them who in your profession is a conservative that you disagree, who's the best person you disagree with? There they might be able to give a name. And that's the kind of person they should be looking to appoint. So bipartisan is the way to be nonpartisan. See, we will, if we can make our way to appointing people we know we disagree with, but we also know are good scholars, good professors, then I think things will start to improve. But one of the troubles of progressivism is that it thinks conservatism is obsolete. So we didn't, well, for example, we give civil rights for our black citizens. Nobody thinks of going back to segregation. Right? So that question has been settled. So why can't that serve as an example for all other questions? Saying that same thing with gays, the same thing with women. We make these stages of progress towards greater equality, and they have this ratchet effect that they can't go backwards. So conservatives are really obsolete. See, they're in the way, and there's also nothing they say that needs to be respected because it smacks of Jim Crow, of the bad old days. Whereas conservatives, for their part, know that liberals, will always be liberals, and that you'll never have a conservative country that never, especially in a country like ours, which has a Declaration of Independence declaring all men are created equal. Okay, that's always going to raise parties of liberalism, of liberals, and inspire them. So you're lucky when you win, but you know you're not always going to win. I think that's more of a conservative attitude, and therefore the two parties have you have a certain toleration and even appreciation for the people you live with who disagree with you. Whereas liberals, though they speak a lot about tolerance, are less tolerant.
So I have a couple bigger topics that I think people want to talk about, but Timberly Williams just asked a question on this one, so we're going to do that and then move on to some other topics. It's kind of a two-part question. Do you think the absence of conservative professors at Harvard is a symptom of a more profound philosophical shift or just institutional self-selection? And what do you think would it take for Harvard to want a conservative intellectual voice, not just tolerate one, but want one?
I think they want one now. I think the Harvard administration is looking for, beginning to look for conservative professors. And this example of the invitation I got from the Crimson, that's not the administration, of course, but I think that you can see that same feeling in Alan Garber and John Manning, two people who are now in charge the Harvard administration. I don't know whether it's infected yet the Harvard Corporation, which has been entirely composed of left-wing progressives with a few liberals, no conservatives. So, but I do think it's on the way. And how far it'll go, I don't know. Satisfactory, I don't know. And these things also depend on the political atmosphere, whether, especially since Donald Trump has gone after the universities.
Well, that is the transition to the next topic.
Okay.
So there are questions about the Trump administration. Um, Jonathan Dempson, who's class of 88, asked about a bunch of people, Machiavelli, Plato, Aristotle. What would they have to say about Trump? Andrew Colville just submitted, what would Edmund Burke think about Trump? So
Yeah.
what is the conservative view of the Donald Trump presidency? And then I'll wrap that up with Patrick Whelan, who just submitted, what is the state of conservatism these days? Is it healthy? What is the conservatives' view on Vance? Is that JD Vance? Is that concerning? So it's both what do conservatives think of Trump and the Trump phenomenon, as well as what is the state of conservative intellectual life in America now?
Mixed. The conservatives are rather pleased to see liberals get a kick in the pants, which is what they're getting. But on the other hand, the things that Trump are doing, I have mixed feelings. I don't like tariffs, and I do like Ukraine. I don't like Trump's domestic policy or foreign policy. They're sort of wrapped up in tariffs, which are both domestic and foreign. I do like what he's doing to the universities. I think he's uh, forcing them to behave much more responsibly than they would have done otherwise. But in general, I think all the great figures you mentioned, Machiavelli and Plato and so, they would regard Trump as a demagogue, as a particular danger of tyranny out of democracy.
Well, what's your view? Is our system robust enough to handle the demagogic threats that Trump poses?
We're going to see. We're going to see. Uh, yes, I think it is. We're beginning to see stirrings among at least some Republicans on the tariff matter. It hits you when your retirement account goes way down, as it has in 1 week. So that may happen. But Trump is not a conservative. He's this is why he might be especially liked by Machiavelli. He's a prince, but he's a new prince. He's trying to overthrow normality, normal beliefs, normal courtesies, normal opinions. Normality, he thinks, is an advantage too much to the status quo, and the status quo consists of liberals who want many bad things. So he's taken dead aim on everything that's normal. The thing is that this is just what woke has been. The woke trend, which you see among liberals, is to overturn the differences, especially say the differences between men and women, which have been thought to be normal. So there's a kind of desire in society generally for some notion of what is normal. people want to have expectations that they can count on or or count on at least to be appreciated, if not always obeyed. And so when you get an attack on what is normal, as came from progressives, say, in regard to, say, sex differences, what happens is the abnormal comes to be normal itself. It replaces the old normal, as they say today, with a new normal. And we've seen this in the recent elections, that Trump, when he won in 2016, tried to brought a new abnormality to attack everything that people thought was normally correct, normal courtesies, for example. And Biden promised to bring back what is normal, but he didn't. So that again in 2024 is returning to normal. Let's return to common sense. Common sense says there are differences between men and women. This is something he's specifically said. So this succession of normal to abnormal to back again to normal has characterized our recent politics.
Um, okay, a couple of questions that came in sort of separately. One is, and you mentioned gender differences. You told the New York Times that you think it's probably true in common sense that women innately have less capacity than men at the highest level of science. Uh, do you still believe that? Why do you believe that? And do you think that discrimination and do you think that social conditions and discrimination are responsible for that, or do you really think that it's innate?
That I don't remember that quotation, but it doesn't matter. I do sort of generally hold that view that men and I still, to begin with, I still like the term sex instead of gender. Gender I consider a grammatical word, saying table is der Tisch in German. That's masculine. And it's la table in French. That's feminine. Those gender differences in grammar don't relate to innate differences. So the use of the word gender instead of sex is a kind of aggressive intimation that sex differences don't matter, that they're as inconsequential as gender differences in language or grammar. That's why the word was introduced. So I still say, and but by the way, nobody speaks of having gender. They still say having sex. Notice that. So, you might say when it comes to nitty gritty, people still use the right word. But that, all right, but that's a matter of language. And so the question is whether uh, sex differences are inconsequential or not. And we are at present engaged in what I would consider a great experiment, which I've called the gender neutral society. That's a society where your sex matters as little as possible. It doesn't give you special rights and it doesn't give you special duties. So, this is in a book I wrote called Manliness that came out a while ago, 2006. And this is where I present a kind of modest, I would call it a modest defense of manliness. It's not 100% good, but it's also different from masculinity. Anyway, let's not go into that. just is it possible to have a society in which sexual differences don't matter? And this has never happened before in recorded human history. So we're trying something that's absolutely new, and we act as if it's common sense that men and women should be not only equal, but in order to be equal, the same. And well, will this succeed? And it has succeeded to a considerable extent so far. The male chauvinists who said women couldn't be doctors or something are all proved wrong. Women are very competent, and they've um, taken up all the professions and done very well. They've left the profession of schoolmarm, much to the disadvantage of our school system. It's all the women who used to be, you could say, exploited as as teachers and school teachers are now left for better paying, higher respected jobs. And so women also have a sense of honor. They like my late wife, who taught at Harvard, also uh, had an office with a name on the door. She liked that. So in all those things, I think um, the experiment has been a success, but not so successful in private, in families, where yeah, I mean the disintegration of the family is I would say an established fact. What's the cause of it? And I'm not sure, but I think feminism is part of it, part of the explanation that men and men and women in families don't respect the sexual differences or the differences in regard to children. Uh, with a, a friend of mine, a woman spoke of her daughter as a baby or as a very young child, and she said when she wants fun, she goes to her dad. When she needs someone, she goes to her mom. So
Yeah.
that kind of difference still remains, and it's not contributed to. And then there are also differences in setting. Going back to the question of women in science, of differences in thinking. And there's a lot of science on this, social psychology, on the way in which men and women speak, for example. Women tend to want to draw you in when they discuss things with you. So they will uh, speak a line like this, two and two are four, aren't they? Raising the voice at the end of the sentence. That's to inveigle, to bring you into the point. Whereas a man is much more likely to state something flat and take it in a take it or leave it manner. That's that kind of thing they go into. And then just looking at this, if you want to say the highest ranks of science, which and also you could say of philosophy. No, I study philosophy, political philosophy, and there isn't a woman there. And now is that as I can ask the question, you restate the question you asked, is that discrimination or is that nature? And up until I just Up until now, there hasn't been a woman philosopher of note. There have been women professors of philosophy, but nobody on the level of John Locke, Rousseau, Kant, Hegel, Plato, Aristotle. That might be discrimination. It would certainly be hard for a woman to make a life as a philosopher in any society. But one would think that if there were a natural capacity at the highest level, it would show itself or find some way to show itself. For example, Jane Austen. Jane Austen is a very great woman novelist, and she made her life in such a way that she could write. And fortunately, she succeeded, and her writings have lasted. So I'm wondering whether if there were a woman scientist or philosopher at that level, um, that she couldn't have made it.
I'm conscious of time here, so I think we got time for two or three more. You know, Sheikh Ahmed asks, why I'm surprised to hear you're so comfortable. I'm paraphrasing now, with the government intrusion into what the universities are up to. Aren't you worried that this could be reversed when a different administration takes power and used in the opposite direction too?
Yes, I am. So that is a definite worry, and that's a good point to be appreciated. But I think that the intrusions of Trump administration have come as a result of invitations from the universities, and especially from the way in which the universities paid no attention to the progress of woke, uh, which was imposed upon them by dear colleague letters from the Department of Education under Obama and Biden. So, and they began with the universities in their progressivism began with a notion that a university is not an ivory tower. Claudine Gay, when she became president of Harvard, the very day she announced it, said openly that the ivory tower is an old idea. It's obsolete. We are now, quote, a part of society. Well, if you are a part of society, you might be called to Washington and asked to answer questions from a tough-minded woman like Elise Stefanik, and that's happened to her. So that's what I mean when I say the universities invited this. The universities need to recover their notion of what the ivory tower is. It was a description of the universities. By the way, the universities are not modern. They were invented in medieval times. And the ivory tower is a tower that is grounded in a particular society. So Harvard is in America. If America goes to war, Harvard goes to war. That happened in World War II. But it rises above society. The things that most people take for granted are the very things that a university should be questioning. So a university is, in its way, subversive of society because society doesn't like to have its principles questioned. Okay. But if it rises above, you can question a principle without making yourself part of a movement to change society. That's what the universities have failed to do. And it's also the case and this is kind of a separate point, that science forces universities to be a part of society. And the reason is that science is extremely expensive. Plato and Aristotle, it cost them nothing. Aristotle, all those treatises he wrote, all he needed was some scratch paper or parchment or whatever could be used. But science needs laboratories because modern science is about experimentation, and experimentation is extremely expensive. So no university can afford to have science in America today without federal money, and that's and that's that means a lot of money. It could no a science professor costs millions of dollars to support. Okay? So then, so that forces that should force universities to be careful about their partisanship, because they might face a Republican Congress at some point, and that's what's happened.
Okay, two more questions, and then we'll let you go. We're conscious that it's 3 hours later where you are.
It's
John Reinen
all right. I'm
says,
not beef yet.
okay. John Reinen says, you mentioned that Republicans are subject to the charge of oligarchy. Was this charge common prior to President Trump? As a Republican, I always thought it was our responsibility to convince the majority that our views were better. Do you think that Republicans are beginning to actually become more sympathetic to oligarchy?
No, they're beginning to find more um, respect for differences in uh, common workers. So as we see, the Republicans are becoming more and more a party of the working class, but of the working class that is proud of itself. I don't think it's a working class that wants more in the way of benefits coming from the government. So, and this is reflected in their attitude towards immigration. They don't like it that illegal immigrants are being treated the same way or even better than they are being treated. So that would be one reason.
Okay. And finally, I have a Harvey Mansfield quote about Harvard, which is, I've always loved it a little more than it deserves. So tell us why, and tell us what your vision is for Harvard in the world in the future.
Oh, I had a great time as an undergraduate. That started it. I was a grind. I never did much except study, uh, but still, I loved it. Um, the reason I saw the Harvard band making fun of me is that I go to every home Harvard football game. And every time I hear that Harvard is in some contest or another and they won, I gives me a little tick of pleasure. So yeah, I do love the place. I like I like a little bit of its old time arrogance uh, that you might think is a defect, and maybe it is. There are these jokes about Harvard. So you'll never regret going to Harvard. Others may, but you won't. That's one. And the other is you can always tell a Harvard man, but you can't tell him much. Well, I'm sure you've all heard those jokes. But so this is what I appreciate and what I like and keeps me from being bitter and angry.
Well, again, on behalf of the club, we want to thank you for spending your evening with us. I think it's been interesting, and I can see from the chat it's also been stimulating, and I think there is a a lively exchange of views already being prompted from that. So thank you for that, and hopefully we'll do it again next year.
Yes, well, thanks very much. I give you greetings from Ipswich, Mass, in the North Shore of Boston, a town founded in 1635. I don't know whether there was a town in Southern California then. There were the Spanish, but
Yeah.
my greetings from here.
Well, thank you. And thank you to everybody for participating. And we hope to see you at the next event. And thank you so much, Professor Mansfield.